So welcome to the Installer Plaza, sponsored by our very good friends at Vaillant. Now I've got a fantastic panel alongside me here, and we're going to have the first in our series of great debates. And we're going to kick off with talking about how we can go about decarbonising our homes, a light topic to start with. And I'm going to say the current government's net zero targets are well publicised, and it is the current government. But how do we get there? New rules have been put in place to decarbonise our homes. Many believe that legislation is needed to drive this transition, but consumers aren't really happy to be doing what they're told sometimes. So what do we need to drive change? We're going to look at the options the government, the industry and installers would like to see. So let me ask you, starting first on my left, to introduce yourselves. Contestant number one, who are you? Where do you come from?
Hi everyone, my name is Charlotte Lee and I'm the Chief Executive of the Heat Pump Association. So forgive me if that is what I focus on today.
Well, that's what we're hoping you're focusing on, yeah.
So hi, Dan White, I'm Market Development Director at MCS. So we're the standards organisation behind most renewable technologies, particularly focused on retrofit, but also with new build as well.
Yeah, good afternoon everybody. My name is Griff Thomas and I'm Managing Director of Heatly, which is the end-to-end app for decarbonising homes, and also, if I can have two titles, well, MD of GTech Training, and we train around about 4,000 to 5,000 people on net zero topics across the UK.
Nice little plug there. Yep, crack on. Next.
Hi, yeah. My name's Jeff House. I'm Director of External Affairs and Policy for Baxi Heating, so we're one of the major manufacturers in the room today.
Hi everybody, Victoria Matthews. I'm Head of External Affairs at Vaillant. We are manufacturers of gas boilers and heat pumps, for those of you who don't know us. And if we're doing plugs, our stand is there.
Brilliant. Well, okay. And here, actually, if you look at it, everywhere. Well, look, welcome, panel. Thank you very much. And look, I'm going to throw some questions out. And whoever you feel wants to pick up on it, then please do. Just jump in. You can feel free to disagree with each other as well. Always makes for interesting viewing if we can do that. But I just wanted to start off. It's been a good year for renewable installs in the UK. And what are the latest figures? Who can just give us an update on the latest figures?
So shall I do a sort of MCS version first? So we can count certified installations. Well, that's all we can count. And how far into a market they stretch sort of changes by technology. In some technologies we understand what else is out there because Heat Pump Association give us some figures on heat pump sales. In others, nobody seems to have any other data. So we came out of last year at just around 200,000 certificates, which is the first time we've been up at those numbers since 2011. So the peak of feed-in tariff. So that's where we've got back to. It's a different balance now. There are far more heat pumps involved than there used to be. Back then you'd have been looking at probably 10 or 11,000 heat pumps within that, with the balance of it being solar PV. We're now looking at, call the 200,000, 40,000 heat pumps within that, and by the time we get to the end of this year, probably 10 or 15,000 batteries in that as well. So we think this year is going to be a bigger year for us than last year, but we think the balance is going to shift. Solar PV had a crazy 18 months after the energy crisis, where it went all the way up to the stratospheric numbers that we saw back in 11, 12, and has capped off. Doesn't seem to have crashed, but it has definitely capped off. Heat pumps are on a very steady growth trajectory, 10-15% a year. This year's pushing on, looking at 30% up so far this year. Battery is brand new, is growing very fast. We're not really publishing that data yet, but it'll be coming up onto the dashboard within the next month or two. So we think this year will be up on last year across all techs, and that's also reflected in installer numbers, which are pushing on to double to where we were pre-COVID.
Yeah, and just to pick up on Dan's point, so 40,000 MCS certified heat pump installations last year, so in 2023. HPA's UK sales data, which captures factory gate sales for the number of heat pumps that are sold in the UK, put that just over 60,200 units last year. But we are, as Dan said, looking at this year, month-on-month growth, 30% up on where we were last year and growing. So we are expecting this year to see a bumper year for heat pumps in the UK, which I think is extremely interesting, especially given the policy uncertainty that remains in this space, but the growth that's happening. And I think testament to that, as you look around the show, is the investment from the manufacturers that are going into the technology. And we're also seeing, from an installer base point of view, massive increase in the number of individuals that are choosing to get a heat pump qualification. So it's really tricky to track the number of individuals who are active in this space, because as a country we register businesses as being certified rather than individuals. But what we can do is track the number of individuals that are undertaking the training, and that was a 166% increase in 2023 relative to 2022 figures, and we're seeing growth on growth for the first quarter of this year too. So positive outlook at this time.
That's good. So is there confidence coming into the marketplace, you'd say?
Anybody
Who
want
wants
that
to
one?
pick that up?
Yeah.
Victoria, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I mean, there is confidence in terms of the manufacturers are making significant investment to be able to manufacture more heat pumps for the UK market. We are seeing more consumer awareness. It is lifting. Like Charlotte was saying, the number of MCS installers is also lifting. So there is that confidence that's coming into the market as we transition.
And I guess just to build on that, the government incentives that support the installation of heat pumps are increasing too. So under the energy company obligation, we've seen for the first time the number of heat pumps installed under that scheme rising above the boiler upgrade scheme, for example. So that's pushing up awareness and installations. But the uplift in the boiler upgrade scheme grant has absolutely helped with growth as well.
So has that been performing well?
I'm hesitant because I was looking at the figures ahead of this panel, and actually if you look at the redeemed voucher value, we've spent 160 million of a potential 450 million, and we've got 6 months left of the scheme. So I think it's important to caveat that the boiler upgrade scheme has not achieved what it was set out to achieve, especially in the first 2 years. However, since the grant uplifted from £5,000 to £7,500, which is a 50% rise for air source heat pumps, which is massive, we've seen a massive jump in applications. And this is what I'm cautious about, because we have seen 100% growth in applications. We haven't seen that filter down into the redemptions yet, but that might be because of the lead time. So we're almost not ready to make a judgment call as to whether the applications are becoming installations yet, but it has increased, and the budget for 25 to 28 is 1.5 billion for the boiler upgrade scheme. So the hope is that it continues to grow based on the current trajectory.
Right, Jeff, yeah.
I think it's just worth adding on that point that the budget for the boiler upgrade scheme is a rolling yearly budget. Such an underspend last year that 90 million went back to Treasury, and that will disappear. It doesn't go towards any green investment. It just disappears into the general balance. So it's a case of use it or lose it, really, with bus.
Use it or use it. Well, use it or lose it. Where do we hear that? How do the figures compare to Europe in terms of the renewable installs we were talking about earlier? Who would like to pick up on that? Yeah, Victoria.
So in terms of Europe, we are behind the majority of mainland Europe.
Do you know why is that, do you think?
I think other countries have had subsidy schemes quicker than us delivered to the market. In some Scandinavian countries, they are commonplace technology. A lot of people in the UK haven't actually got first-hand experience of heat pumps yet, and it's almost that, talking to a friend and having that awareness of that technology. We're not quite caught up, but I think there's the opportunity to do that.
Right.
But I think there's a reflection on a success, which is, in the 70s, the UK gasified the nation. It saved people an awful lot of money. It took away oil, it took away coal, it led us down a combustion-based heating system, which 50 years on we're still doing.
Yeah.
Europe didn't do that so much.
Right.
We are a very gas nation compared to the rest of Europe. So those nations such as France, had much more electricity, naturally moved towards heat pumps because electrification is already there. So part of our reflection is the success. Gas has been an incredibly cheap way of heating your home for the past 50 years.
It's our own fault.
So therefore, people have not needed to look beyond it.
Yeah.
Things have changed fundamentally in the last 18 months, 2 years now. That I think is the beginning of the spur of the next step.
So I think one of the elephants in the room that will no doubt come up again later in the conversation is what's called the spark gap or the spark spread. So in the UK, we've got one of the highest differentials between the price of natural gas and the price of retail electricity, which means that running a heat pump doesn't necessarily mean you save any money. And that's a big challenge. So on the continent where we're seeing big uptake, in France especially, the spark gap is a lot shorter, so it makes a rational purchase decision. Whereas unless you're on a certain tariff or you've got, a really, really good COP with an underfloor system, for example, and a ground source heat pump, then it can be hard to make those numbers stack up.
Go on, Charlotte. Yeah, Griff, I'll bring you in a second.
Finally, on that, I think we need to make sure we're comparing apples with apples. So a lot of the European data includes air-to-air heat pumps within their data sets, and the UK don't currently capture that data. So we're focusing on the 60,200 units that I mentioned are air-to-water units. Whereas across the border, air-to-air heat pumps are commonplace and often included in the statistics. So whilst we are absolutely behind, we just need to make sure that we're comparing like with like.
Brilliant. And you've been sitting there like a tennis umpire watching you back.
Don't get me started, because nobody else will get a word in, I can tell you. So I think, just touching on the spark gap conversation, that's really important. And there is always attached to anything that I used to call renewable, now net zero, low carbon, you take your pick of the term of the week. People are always dire to save money. And that's not been the case in any other building service that I can ever remember. That didn't happen with data cabling, with broadband, with coal fire going to gas, going to oil, and all of those have been really, really rapid transitions in recent terms. And I won't point to anybody in the audience, but I can see one or two faces who will remember when only the posh people in the street had gas central heating because they could afford it, and indoor bathrooms, and more recently LED lighting. And all of this has come about with all of the same barriers, all of the same hurdles. And there's a really big element of social change that's needed as well, about the expectations. Does it have to save money to be worth doing, or does it just become, why wouldn't I install a heat pump compared to why would I? And I think we need to figure out how we can get to that point.
So it's the call to action that's important here in terms of getting people to understand the importance of doing it. By the way, if you feel as though you've been attacked by Griff there, feel free to make a comment or come back with an observation or ask a question. So just shout or hold your hand up, we'll come to you. Going back to the boiler upgrade scheme, are there any improvements that you think? Yes, go ahead.
The technology focus is far too narrow.
Too narrow?
Too narrow. So
right.
We're blinkingly looking at ground and air source heat pumps only of a very specific configuration. So coming to market and also very, very popular across Europe are hybrid heat pumps. So one of the challenges we've got the UK housing stock is a proliferation of combi boilers. So little white box in the kitchen does heat and hot water from one box, nowhere to put a cylinder. So that makes it challenging in some cases to get a full heat pump system in. With a hybrid heat pump, you can have small combi boiler, small heat pump working in tandem with a controller that switches based upon smart grid signals or temperatures. And we're really keen to see those included in policy support in the future, because they can unlock the decarbonisation journey for a lot more homes.
Victoria.
I think from my perspective, one of the things that's missing out of the boiler upgrade scheme is the uplift that could be available for those living in more rural locations, so in off-gas properties, because they have got more limited options of technology. That would follow the same narrative that we see in Scotland with our Home Energy Scotland policy, where you do get an extra £1,500 if you live in a rural location. So I think there's a few tweaks that can be done to maximise the spend of the boiler upgrade scheme.
Now, go on. Yeah.
I was just going to say there has been a recent change to the boiler upgrade scheme, which previously required you to have an EPC certificate that had no outstanding recommendations for loft and cavity wall insulation. That's been removed as a prerequisite now. So whilst you do have to have an EPC, an energy performance certificate that's within the last 10 years, you don't have to necessarily undertake the upgrades prior to the heat pump installation, which I think from an administrative point of view may help in some cases. But I know that they are looking to consult on changes to the boiler upgrade scheme, or a new government may wish to consult on changes to the boiler upgrade scheme, to look at how third-party finance models can interact with that scheme too, which will help protect the consumer as well as the government funding. So that's the tricky bit with the third-party finance that they're sort of navigating currently to create some policy positions that may be able to help unlock finance as well as the upfront grant to cover the extra bit on top.
Thank you. Griff, you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, I think we also need to look at some of the fantastic schemes we've had in the past across other technology sectors as well. And I've been around this now for around about 20 years. And there is a very distinct lack of corporate memory within any department about any other scheme that's ever been run ever. And we've had some great initiatives. We've had some not so great as well. But, you know, even amongst the panel here, we could all look at some of those and come up with a way in which and a mechanism in which things could work really well. And dare I say things like the boiler scrappage scheme, which was outstripped its targets several fold, and learning what was good from that, what was bad from that, and how we can integrate that into other schemes going forwards.
Jeff.
Lovely. I think last but not least on bus as well, there's the question of red tape. So it's complex. You know, if you're
Surely not.
it's a government scheme. It's complex. Comes with the territory. But one thing I'm hearing on the grapevine is that a lot of the boiler upgrade scheme funding is actually being swallowed up by large energy companies. So you've got people out there that are advertising, you know, buy a heat pump for 500 quid and we'll fit it for you. And that's where all that money seems to be going. So there's a question of equity and how do we protect that funding to enable smaller installers to actually access it fully.
Go on, Dan.
I think there's an interesting just reflection that if you add up every expectation or dream of the boiler upgrade scheme, it still doesn't shift the dial. You know, it's still a small scheme. There are other streams of funding. We talked about eco already, social housing decarbonisation funds, Scottish plans, Welsh plans, warm home, and all the rest of it. You know, all of that coming together begins to move a dial. But we're still operating at, you know, if 60,000 is the wildest dream against 1.5, 1.6 million gas boilers a year, we're still not shifting it. There's something far more fundamental about it. You know, Griff was talking about how do we make this normal? How do we make this? And you know, we've just come off a panel about future home standard.
Right.
You know, an electrification of future homes will mean there will be more properties that don't have gas in them. It will become more normal. I won't call them out, but there's a Swedish business over there who've just come into the UK market. It's really interesting when you talk to them. They say, I've just moved to the UK and I've had to learn how to use a gas boiler. You know, what an absolute flip point of difference to hear. You know, they're going, oh my God, what does this button do? Oh, the radiators are too hot.
Well, thank God we're not in Europe anymore.
Exactly.
We're getting European. Oh no,
Yeah,
hang
yeah.
on. Let's not
So
go there.
That's where we've got to get to, where it is normal to do this, not abnormal.
And look, there is a huge herd of elephants in the room right now because a week on Thursday we've got quite an important day in this country's future. And what difference is that?
It's my birthday.
It's your
It's my
birthday.
yes.
Well, that's what I meant actually, Griff.
Thank you very much for bringing that up.
Did you put a bet on it being your birthday? I just wanted to check.
Funnily enough, I did. Yeah, same as last year.
Same
and
as
the year
last year,
before.
same as
Yes.
last year. But I mean, what difference is it going to make whether we've got a new? Well, whatever happens, we've got a new government or new personnel in the current government. You know, these schemes are great until they're not great anymore because someone new comes in, wants to change it or whatever. Who wants to pick up on that? Griff.
I think right now, I mean, just look around us. Yeah. And there's entities who are investing hundreds of millions, nay, billions within decarbonisation sector. They're not doing that based on the 4-year policy of any government that may or may not come to fruition.
Yeah.
They're basing that kind of investment on seeing that the future of heat is decarbonisation, be that partial, be it fully, be it a blend of hybrid solution and not hybrid, and looking as to how they can build commercial models in the same way that people have done for vehicle finances and kitchens and bathrooms and anything else within the home, buying carpets, etc., so that people can have what they desire in their home, i.e. a warm home.
So it's all very well manufacturers and trade bodies and governments saying what they want, what they think people should do, but actually it boils down at the end of the day to the people and convincing them that it's the right thing to do. So that is kind of quite a big issue, isn't it?
Yeah, and just take that one, because what we're not doing as a sector is suggesting anybody rips anything out. And I think that's been heavily politicised, especially over the last couple of weeks. And I would have loved to be a fly on the wall in the Labour Party manifesto writing briefing as to when that sentence about not ripping out a boiler was put in. And I'd bet, I didn't, but I would, that it would go on, that it got included after the first round of leader debate, when it was thrown up as a political issue about forcing consumers to do anything. And I think that's really tricky.
Though. That's scaremongering.
It is scaremongering, and it's political point scoring to the detriment of reducing our UK carbon emissions. And that is actually the end game here. It's not heat pumps. It's not solar thermal.
It's a much bigger end game.
The end game is how do we decarbonise the carbon emissions that come from UK heating currently, which currently stand at 14% of the total UK carbon emissions. So it's that we need to deal with in the best way that we can. And I think from a consumer point of view, we need to remember, and as a country, we all have a part to play. We're not telling you, there's nobody telling anybody anything, but at what point do you think about when your boiler comes to break, or when you're looking like you need to have a replacement, to get it ready for a low carbon heating system, so that at a point of change you're swapping it for something that has got low carbon. And it's that message, I think, that we need to be developing, and the government is looking at that to get homes heat pump ready with an energy efficiency voucher scheme. And I say government, that was a previous government proposition, but I think it would be really beneficial to look at emitter-sizing, to look at positioning of a hot water cylinder if a house doesn't already have one, and start the journey so that customers don't think that it's imposed. It's a conscious choice that they're ready for
because
at
they'll
point
push
of time.
back. They'll push
quite.
back. Right. But how well educated, in the nicest sense, do you think the customers are? There's a lot of talk and a lot of technical talk and so on and so forth.
And I think this comes to the installer, which is the installer show, and why we're all here today and why the investment is here. I mean, it's well known that consumers have a trusted installer. That's who they tend to go for the advice and the information.
They're the best sales force.
Absolutely. And Part L of the building regulations now requires that all new heating systems are designed to 55-degree flow temp, but not to replace a boiler. It's just if it's a brand new heating system. Yet if that conversation starts happening now at point of replacement, as well as of the unit as well as the system, we can start making it feel like a conscious decision rather than a scary one they've got to make at point of distress, which is never a nice place to be.
Distress purchase. Jeff, been trying to get in, then
Yeah,
Victoria,
sure.
I'll come to you after.
In terms of the politics of it, so we will have a new government next week. It's pretty odds on who that's going to be. So we've got a list of asks from Miliband and Co. in terms of
Don't bet on it.
what we'd like to see. I'm not betting a man, so I won't do it. Just on the politicisation point, though, net zero as a whole is suddenly this political football, not just here, that across Europe. So we've seen a dash to the right. We've seen a far right coalition coming into force in the Netherlands, and they've started to dismantle some of the net zero policy. We've seen a bit of a backlash in Germany when they proposed a boiler ban called the heat hammer, and that was withdrawn very, very quickly when the poll ratings dropped. So there's this very real thing. We're going to see a lot more division and a lot more bad narrative in the press over the next couple of years as this plays out.
I think it goes back to the point as well, which Charlotte raised and Jeff's already mentioned about the spark gap, and having for consumers to actually see a price, the difference in their pockets to make them transition onto a heat pump, because that is the lowest carbon and the lowest cost heating. So I think as we go into a new government, and hopefully net zero is front and centre, because it, like Jeff said, it has become a bit of a political football. I'd like to see more green finance packages, more support for consumers, heat as a service models as well, things that we're not currently doing in this market, which we've seen in other European markets, which has sparked that success.
Griff, did you want to say something? You're nodding low. Okay. Has anybody got any comments or questions they'd like to make before we carry on? Yes, can I grab your microphone? Tell us who you are, where you come from, and what your vested interest is. Hold it nice and close, please.
Hi, my name's Sarah Knight.
Sorry,
can you hear me
yeah,
all right?
Very
good, thank you. My name's Sarah Knight. I'm actually from Stam Build Company, but I am actually an end consumer. I'm getting to the point, I'm at the distress point. So it's quite interesting, but I'm in a rural area. I'm off-grid. I've recently bought a house. It's over 20 years of an oil boiler that I'm working with. So, but in terms of potential damp, I'm being advised against heat pumps. It's really confusing in terms of what grants I can and can't get, because, as you said, if there's an advisory on an EPC, which is advising cavity wall insulation because of damp, however, I'm right near the coast, so I'm advised against cavity wall insulation. Also, there's the council tax band issue, because it's band E, and apparently you get grants from A to D. I regularly get marketing spam through the post from companies telling me I'm eligible for grants. It's completely confusing. Solar is another area, but I potentially need a new roof, I'm being told, to get solar. So there was nothing straightforward in terms of which option to go for at all. So that's from a consumer point of view. And it just needs completely clarifying, I think.
Your nickname's not Lucky, is it?
No, exactly.
Who wants to pick up on that? It's like,
Sarah, just to say, I understand there's a lot of information on the internet around different grants and what you can get and the different requirements. I think if I was in your position, I'd be gone to a manufacturer's website, pick which manufacturer you want to look at the heat pumps proposition, see if it works for you, but also looking at the find an installer page so that actually somebody can come out and talk you through that journey. They can talk to you about what grants are available, what alterations are needed to be done to your property to make sure that we can optimise the heat pump appliance.
is that... She's going to come back at you now. Do you know any manufacturer? No, I'm just...
Yeah, it seems to be there's very few people that can actually come in and say, these are your options, these are the disadvantages, these are the advantages, because I'm being thoroughly advised against heat pump, because of the property. So then it's like, okay, where else can I go?
Is it the installers who advise you?
Yeah, different
against?
installers and builders for this area.
Griff.
Come to Heatley afterwards, and I'll guarantee you'll make it all work without any issues. There are negatives and there's positives to every journey, right? Who'd have thought you needed to drill a hole in your wall when the oil boiler was fitted, and you needed this oil tank and it had to be this far from the boundary? That's actually my background is oil heating. Ooh, don't tell everybody in the crowd. So come and have a chat afterwards. We'll know somebody in your area, and it is completely impartial, and we'll be able to give you a really straight picture of what you can do through heatley.com.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Tony from the Energy Systems Catapult.
Nice and close, Tony.
This is probably one towards Charlotte. You touched on it earlier about the air-to-air heat pumps and the very low take-up with the air-to-air heat pumps in the UK. Is there anything that the Heat Pump Association feels should be done about that to bring on air-to-air heat pumps and the benefits of it?
So air-to-air heat pumps are becoming much more of a focus for the government. So the reason they focus on heat pumps, rightly or wrongly, is because they are the most energy efficient alternative. So that's why air-to-water heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, the hydronic variety offers the greater efficiency for the home and helps them meet their carbon emission reductions targets more quickly. However, air-to-air heat pumps are also very efficient and have a high efficiency benefit compared to the fossil fuel heating systems or direct electric, because they still have an efficiency output. So they are being considered by the government at the moment, or they were, and my understanding is that there is a move to look at whether or not air-to-air units can or will be supported through the boiler upgrade scheme for certain property types. And I think that's what's key here. So if a house, for whatever reason, isn't suitable for a hydronic heat pump system, there's not room for, they don't have a wet central heating system installed currently, for example, or there's no room for a cylinder, or lots of different reasons. At that point, the government may look to supporting air-to-air units. I don't think it's right to say air-to-air units are not supported or particularly well taken up in this country currently. I meant was we're not capturing data on the number of air-to-air units that are providing heating as well as cooling. So I think there is a very strong air conditioning market in the UK, and it is growing, especially in the commercial arena. But it's what properties might benefit from air-to-air heating and cooling solutions that is just being looked at now. And I believe actually the government are funding some research through NG Systems Catapult on air-to-air heat pumps and the way they interact with the grid to make sure that there's not going to be an issue on grid demand during the peaks of summer when cooling is high and the sun isn't shining at night time, for example. They also need to get some in situ performance data on the efficiency of air-to-air units, and without that they won't be able to be included in the boiler upgrade scheme. And finally, there needs to be some standards and installer certification for air-to-air heating for them to be able to get eligibility under the boiler upgrade scheme, which is currently linked to certification under MCS.
Yeah, Dan.
Sounds like me.
Sounds like you.
So interesting, the air-to-air has always been included in MCS, just that nobody's ever taken it up because governments have
You
almost
don't have any
actively-
standards though, Dan.
Yeah, there's a product standard. back there.
Installer.
Yeah. It says you can install as long as it's optimised.
There's a lot of shaking
Yeah.
of heads going on
Yeah.
here.
So
and you're
anyway.
stuck between two.
So
In development.
air-to-air is coming everywhere, I think is the point. And that's partially because once you accept electrification, then it's a more obvious walk-in. And I think partially because, again, new build is talking about overheating as much as underheating. And therefore heating and cooling is coming at that end of the spectrum as well. So I think it will, Scotland seem to be ahead of this as usual, thinking about it quite actively, and particularly think about their, tenement housing stock. It's a great solution that potentially. So I think it will be normalised, as that word again here, over the next few years, and we're ready to support it, and the working groups are in there at the moment. Yeah.
You happy with that answer, Charlotte?
Yes, no, I'm very supportive of MCS and
Very
we're working closely with them on it, but it's just important to say that support under the boiler upgrade scheme and government, in order to spend their money, they need those checks and balances in place, and they rely currently on MCS or equivalent schemes to provide that, and it's not there yet. So without it, the funding won't come.
Griff?
But we do have approved document L, and we have EN 12831, all of which will provide you with a heat loss for each room. And we have product data and manufacturer data, which would allow you to select the right product to put into each room or combination of rooms. And I think we can get very carried away with trying to compartmentalise these. One of the biggest barriers I see, however, is, again, the installers and the empowering of installers to suggest it as an option, because it's all a little bit alien to them.
Well, if you think it's alien to them, imagine what the consumer
to the
feels,
consumer,
because
but it's, if almost anybody in a room has a problem with their heating system, they will call Bob or Julie, the plumber they've had for the last 15 years, and say, Bob or Julie, what do you think I should do?
They trust them.
And we need to empower that conversation, just like we did with solar thermal back in the day, just like we did with condensing boilers, which were a big part of my life as an installer.
So let me ask you, sorry to interrupt you, but I've sat here for the last 9 years on various panels, and so we need to educate them. Who's going to do that? Who's going to do it?
I think we have to move to that social change, which I'm not sure I've got the answer as to how that happens, but it comes back to that why wouldn't you instead of why would you.
Yeah.
Nobody goes down the pub and says, I've had an amazing heat pump installed. You only
don't know
hear
what
the
pub
bad
you're going to.
stories. You only hear the bad stories.
They might go down the pub and say, I've saved 500 quid on my heating bill.
That's right.
I'll buy
That's
a
a
round.
good news story.
And that's why we need to make it an economically viable proposition as well as an environmentally viable one. And that goes back to the lowest carbon heat, which is electricity, being the lowest cost heat. And I think the cost will drive the conversations and open the doors to the consumers, because it's relatable, and from an installer point of view, it builds confidence that they're not going to get calls from their consumers saying something's wrong, my energy bills have gone up, and they don't want that responsibility too. So
500 quid is almost enough to buy around these days as well. But go on.
And I think this acceptance that electrification is coming. Until that is accepted, you will still cling on. You'll keep your gas boiler going. You'll keep what you know going. You
But that's why there's so much confusion, surely, in the market, in the consumer's mind. What do I do? Where do I go? What do I trust? Victoria, were you going to come in and say something? No, you won't. Go on. No. Anybody else got any questions or comments they'd like to make before we move on? Charlotte, let me come to you. You mentioned in a recent speech that heat pump install costs are higher due to work like pipe sizing, radiator upgrades, heat loss calculations, which would benefit all heating systems. Is that a fair way to resolve it, do you think?
I think it's really important because we're not comparing cost data like for like. If you replace your boiler with a boiler, that's the cost of that unit. If you're replacing your boiler with a heat pump, invariably you could potentially, as a consumer, need to undertake some heating system upgrades to make sure that the heating system is operating at a lower flow temperature so that you get the energy efficiency and the value out of the heat pump. Having said that, optimizing your heating system in that way would also positively impact your boiler. So whilst it's more necessary or better for a heat pump to run at those low temperatures, it's better for any heating device to run at those lower temperatures. Yet the cost of doing so is lumped in with a heat pump installation. Once we get to a point in the UK that we all have heat pumps and we're swapping a heat pump for a heat pump, the cost won't be as they are now because it's the unit that gets swapped, not the whole heating system optimization that gets swapped. My colleagues are probably better placed to explain why that is, but it's tricky because we end up in a situation where we're not comparing apples with apples again, but from a consumer point of view, they see the end cost result, which is right and reasonable for them to look at, but it's a one-time hit after which the cost of replacement is much more acceptable.
Which will be easier to manage with future home standards. You know, we've got new build properties designed for heat pump systems. The challenges that Charlotte's described there in changing the whole, parts of the system, it'll already be there. It'll be sorted. So it'll be a lot easier to kind of change those componentry as time goes on for consumers in new build properties.
Okay, we've got 2 or 3 minutes left, and a couple of questions I'd like to ask you. Are there any policies or initiatives that you're seeing from abroad that you'd like us to adopt here?
I'd like to look at one across the board, in Scotland. So they've got the rural grant uplift that Victoria mentioned earlier. So the grant for a heat pump is £7,500, but if you live in a rural area, it's £9,000. So they provide that uplift. But they also provide 0% finance loans as the Scottish Government, up to £7,500. So a consumer can get access to £15,000 total, or 16.5, to swap their heating system with no direct upfront cost from them and the 0% finance loans.
Thank you. Yeah.
I don't think we need to look as far as Europe. With some great examples of what's happening in our country. When we look at Your Home Better in Manchester, that energy efficiency service that's been provided by Greater Manchester Combined Authority, kind of guiding homeowners through the journey, giving them support. It's that one-stop shop. So there are really good examples happening here. We don't need to write the UK off.
So why is that not being rolled out then?
I think at the moment we're getting to more and more combined authorities, and they're all looking at their climate action plans, and slowly they're implementing these. So I think it's time. Time is the issue.
Is this joined up? No, it's not. Is it? Okay, go on.
Again, that sort of leads into an area-based approach. So the challenges of being Joe or Josephine public, trying to figure out what your options are, and the lady spoke about that earlier, it can be confusing. If your local authority says, okay, this area is prime for this technology type and we're going to help you with it and do a fully tailored package of approach, that is the way to get the market moving in a very sort of quick way. It's that economy of scale.
It's the scale, isn't it? And that is what Labour are proposing. So subject to the results of next week, under a Labour government, they're looking very much at local area energy plans, empowering the local authorities, trying to build the skills needed in that particular area and optimise accordingly. So it may be coming. Let's be optimistic.
We'll just say that the other political parties are available to vote
Absolutely.
for as well. We don't want to go down that road at all. No, let's talk religion, far easier. Let me ask you, as we mentioned the government and so on, what particularly would you like to see the new government, whoever it is, announce? Griff, you're straight in on the microphone.
Oh, I don't know, let me just throw it out there. How about a 10 or 12-year plan that nobody can revoke? Because let's be honest, we'd all get behind that. It's one of the biggest problems we've had in the renewable sector forever, is that a government comes in, a policy comes in, it's short-lived, it's medium-lived, it's not, it is. Who wants to stand there in an office of a huge corporation of which we will need these people to be involved for a long-term sustainable price-dropping heat pump installation industry, when in 6 months' time that policy could be revoked or changed? It doesn't inspire confidence in any market to do with anything. So just something that's fixed, that everybody can agree on and pin their hopes on for the future and their investment plans.
Victoria, yes, then Jeff.
I think that policy roadmap can really support installers as well, because at the moment, if you're an installer, you're walking around this show, there's a mix of technologies.
Yeah.
It's what horse do I want to back? Whereas if we had that clear government narrative and I suppose the associated funding mechanisms to go alongside that to support them in their transition, that would really make it a lot easier. And as you said at the beginning, those installers, they're the salespeople for our technology.
Yeah. Jeff, you're nodding along.
Yeah, back
Not
to the,
nodding off, nodding along, I say.
back to the electricity price thing, so electricity price reform. Once we get to that tipping point of it actually makes a lot of sense to get a heat pump from a financial point of view, we're starting to see that with EVs. So once we get to that point of actually that makes sense, we've seen 20% early adopters going for it now, we're seeing 20% people that will never change, argue against it. It's that middle chunk of people that we need to get to. Once we reach that tipping point of yes, this makes sense to me, the market will go.
Brilliant. Dan, did you want to make any comment?
Yeah, I think clarity, consistency, a time scale that people can plan against. What we see time and time again, that is when demand arrives, the supply chain reacts through productivity, through innovation, through product supply, frankly. But for that to happen, people have got to understand that this is an electrical future in terms of generation and heating and all the other elements that go to it with interoperability.
So I'm going to leave the last word with you. We started with you. Let's finish with you. As the CEO of the Heat Pump Association, how excited are you for the future, and how much work still has to be done?
I mean, there's a lot of work still to be done. I mean, we look at the 60,000 units that were sold next year. That's a tenfold increase across 5 years if you're going to meet the 600,000 target, which is what's been proclaimed as being needed in order to meet and to get on the right trajectory to meet the UK carbon budget, the 6th carbon budget. However, we've seen just with our sales data statistics alone, a 26% growth in Q1 this year compared to last year. When we had a 5% total growth in 2023, that's a big uplift. There was a recent survey conducted by installers to look at what the installer feel is. 87% of the installers that responded to the survey wanted to install more heat pumps. So I think the future is absolutely bright. The future is going to be electrification, and it's how quickly that the sector can react based on certainty. And that's what we're waiting for, right, from the new government. We need confirmation that the future home standard is going to be introduced. We need confirmation on what's happening around the clean heat market mechanism. And ideally, we need a phase-out date that says from this time, you can't replace your fossil fuel boiler with a fossil fuel boiler. And that would allow everybody to get on board, to get ready, to get to know that is coming and to be prepared. And that's what I was talking about with the energy efficiency voucher scheme, to help consumers become prepared to own the transition. The choice isn't if, the choice is how, and that will come over the next 10 to 12 years.
It's confirmation and confidence.
Confidence is key.
Confidence is key. Brilliant. Listen, thank you so much, Charlotte, Dan, Griff, Jeff and Victoria. Really great to have you here. Are you going to be able to stick around if anybody wants? They were too embarrassed to ask live, or maybe ask who you're betting on or whatever, I don't know. But would you please thank our panel for their input today? Thank you very much.